Namaste. Namaste all. Welcome to all of you. We are on the 13th day of August 2022 and going through the synthesis of yoga with our beloved Ranga. We are on page 45. Beginning with the line, the method we have to pursue then is to put our whole conscious being into relation and contact with the divine.
Before we start reading this para, we'll give you a preliminary introduction to what he is saying so that we... So, in the previous para, he has discussed all the different methods of yoga. Jnana Yoga, that is the path of knowledge. Bhakti Yoga, which is the path of devotion and love to the divine. And Karma Yoga, the way of works. Every work that you do, you offer to the divine. So these are three different types and they use different aspects of our being. Jnana Yoga uses the mind. The Bhakti Yoga uses the emotional part of our being, and the Karma Yoga uses the body and the will. So this is, but each one neglects the other aspects of the system. He has also discussed the Tantra, he has also discussed the Hatha Yoga. But all of them have got very specific purposes and they use only one part of our, as I said, our system, so that it becomes easy to concentrate. But Srimda is not satisfied with only knowing one aspect of the divine. He wants you to have the divine in full, in all his aspect of knowledge, his aspect of will, his aspect of love and ananda, and he wants everything. Which means that he has to combine all these yogas and make a new system called the integral yoga, which is a synthesis of the systems. Then he has also discussed how to do this synthesis. Is it possible to do all together or do we do one by one? He has all discussed this in the previous chapters, and if you do it one by one, it will take too long and one life is not enough. You will have to have many lives for that. Then the other system is if you do them all together, they are so contradicted to each other that it will be a chaos and not a synthesis. So, the mind and the vital, as we all know very well, are often in quarreling among themselves. The same with the vital and the body. The vital demands things from the body which the body can't comply with. So, this is the problem. So, he says, we'll examine all the different systems and get something common to them, and then we will apply and we use that principle for the synthesis of yoga. Now, his aim in yoga is to have the divine fully without escaping from the physical world. The Jnana Yoga and particularly the Jnana Yoga and the Bhakti Yoga, they seem to neglect the physical world because to them it seems that this is a field of permanent imperfection. And not to speak of evil and falsehood and whatnot. So they tend to reject the physical mind, the mind, life, body, and escape from their consciousness and soul into the spiritual planes of consciousness and enjoy there the status of the knowledge, ananda, power and whatnot. Each one has a different aspect. But Srimad also discusses the Tantra, where there is something common with the integral yoga. Instead of running away from the difficulties of the physical world, the tantrics, they face the difficulties of the world and conquer them while here. If you are going on a path, okay, and you have an obstruction, there are several ways of meeting this obstruction. One is you take a shortcut and avoid the mistake and go. You take a side lane and escape. That is what the Jnana Yogis are doing, most of them. But if you confront the problem and find a solution, you have permanently solved the problem. If you have taken a shortcut, the problem remains with you and you have not mastered the problem. But in yoga, in synthesis of yoga, he wants you to confront the problem, not run away from it, and solve it there itself before you go on. And that is what the tantrics also do. But there is one big difference between the tantrics and the integral yoga. The tantrics go out of their way to meet headlong these difficulties. They indulge in things which are normally advised not to do. So that is not necessary in the integral yoga. If they come, you deal with them. But it's not necessary to invite them. Okay, so the tantrics, they do everything that you are not supposed to do in the moral sense. Okay, so this is the difference between the two. But he has great admiration for the tantric method, and he has also examined the nature, what nature is doing in her evolution. Nature has progressed from matter to life to mind, and so he says there is already a hint of how to combine what nature is doing and going from one level, material level, to the life level, from life level to the mind level. We will follow the same system and extend what nature is doing to the next step. And that's a supramental manifestation on earth, beyond the mind. So this is his whole idea. Not to run away from the world like the tantrics. And also, I might as well mention that the tantrics have three things which are common with the integral yoga. No running away from the physical world, common to both. Aim of life is ananda. Knowledge, of course, is there, but ananda. Normally, we have an idea that if you enjoy yourself, it is going to give you attachment and desire, and it's better to avoid these pleasures. But ananda is different from pleasure. You can have ananda without attachment, without ego, without desire. So that is the permanent ananda which the tantrics want, and that also is what the Sri Aurobindo yoga wants. Aim, you must not run away from all these things. Then the third thing which is common to them is the worship of the Divine Mother, the aspect of Shakti. This is there in the tantrics. They worship the Divine Mother. They don't go through the Purusha aspect, they go through the Prakriti aspect. So Sri Aurobindo also says, we will also do that. We will take help from the Divine Mother. And constantly his refrain is always, ask the mother for help, ask the mother for help. Go to the mother and surrender to her. When mother was here physically, it was the mother, but even then he used to stress that it's not a physical relation with the mother that we know. It is the inner relation with the mother that is important. So, these are the three things. So, now he says how to do the synthesis. That's what we are going to read now. Another thing which is mentioned earlier, which we might as well mention here, that if you want to know the divine integrally, you want to have knowledge, you want to have love for the divine, you must be able to live in the physical world and do all the works that you are doing without any impurities seeping into you. Then you have to do the synthetic method. But if you want only to escape from the physical world, like the Jnana Yogins and the Bhakti Yogins, then you need not do the integral yoga at all, not necessary. Integral yoga becomes essential if you want to know the divine integrally. No running away from the world. So now we start reading the para that we have to read today, the method.
And I might say that if anyone has a question at any point, you are welcome to ask it.
There is another thing we might mention about Sri Aurobindo's style of writing. Okay. Very often when we are giving an exposition, we will say, we start from here and this will be my last conclusion. Now I go step by step and explain, but I have told you beginning what I am going to, my conclusion, what it is going to be. Often Sri Aurobindo does not do that. He goes into each step, and he will tell you his conclusion at the end. So, here he is not specifically, the method he is going to mention here, but he has put it very, very tersely and very, very clearly in the mother. So, the integral method would be a constant aspiration for the divine, a constant surrender to the divine, and a constant rejection of all that you see imperfect or perverse or negative qualities in yourself. So these are the three methods that he uses. So we might as well mention this as it sums up the integral method. Now the method that we are going to use, we are going to read that now.
I have a question.
Yeah, tell me.
What do you mean by reject here?
Reject. You get angry? You. After that, the anger will continue for 2-3 hours, it will disturb you. So why do you want disturbance? When the anger comes, you say, I don't want it. You must use your will and your mind and even your heart if you want. Reject it. Don't want it. You can imagine it coming from outside and you say, I don't want it. Normally we accept it and we justify it also. I am only taking the example of anger because it's very easy to understand. When you are angry with somebody, those vibrations will last for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 3 days sometimes. So why do you want that disturbance? Reject it.
So rejection is acknowledgement that you don't want.
Yeah. If you get, for instance, if you get a desire, okay, if your desire is satisfied, you will be happy for 2 hours, 3 hours, 1 day, 2 days. After that, if your desire is not satisfied, you will be miserable. So desire is going to give you pleasure, but also it's going to give you pain. Reject desire. As soon as the desire comes in, think it's coming from outside and reject it. I don't want it. That's rejection, not suppression. There's a difference between suppression and rejection.
Very true.
Suppression is you don't indulge in the outward act, but you're still going on. The thought is going on in your mind. You're not rejecting it from your mind or your vital. That is suppression. But rejection is you throw it out of your mind and you throw it out. Not that it's easy. It will keep coming back. But every time it comes back, throw it out again. Throw it out again. It's like taming a wild animal.
Mother told my friend, express, but never suppress.
Yes. And we might as well add to that, don't suppress but reject.
Yes, yes.
All right. So that's the method. Now, what Srimad is saying here, we'll read. The method we have to pursue then is to put our whole conscious being into relation and contact with the Divine and to call Him in to transform our entire being into His. Thus, in a sense, God Himself, the real person in us, becomes the sadhaka of the sadhana as well as the master of the yoga, by whom the lower personality is used as the center of a divine transfiguration and the instrument of its own perfection. In effect, the pressure of the tapas, the force of consciousness in us, dwelling in the idea of the divine nature upon that which we are in our entirety, produces its own realization. The divine and all-knowing and all-affecting descends upon the limited and obscure, progressively illumines and energizes the whole lower nature and substitutes its own action for all the terms of the inferior human light and mortal activity. So the language is always very terse and we have to look at all the words and see how he uses words. Behind the words, if you get to the main idea of what he's saying behind the words, things become clear and helps us in the next reading. So, the method that we have to pursue, this we is very specific. It's not a general we. It is the integral yoga. Okay, this is something we have to see very carefully. It's not the method we have to pursue. It's not applicable to everybody. It's applicable only to the integral yoga. Okay, the method we have to pursue then is to put our whole conscious being into relation and contact with the divine. So, what does he mean by the whole conscious being? Is there something unconscious in us? Of course there is. We don't know the subconscious, we don't know the inconscious, we don't know the intraconscious, nor don't we know the circumconscious also around us. The circumconscious is the aura, and we are not very conscious of our aura. Sometimes you are, but you are not conscious of even your aura. Then there is something below you, there is something, the foundation that is there. If you think of yourself as a house, it's very useful to, as an image, to understand what you really are. What are you as an individual? You are nothing but the universe condensed. That's what you are. The whole universe is there and you condense it, and that's what the individual is. Whatever is there in the universal is there in the individual. There is universal matter, You have a body corresponding to that in a small measure. There is a universal plane of energy, prana, shakti, and you have your vital, a small formation of that. Then there is a mind plane of consciousness where thoughts are there. And you have your mind, from there a small portion of that energy is taken and your mind is made. So there is a clear relation between the individual and the universal. That is the reason why you can become universal. It's like a grain of salt, if you want. It helps this image. You are a grain of salt. You have got specific color, shape, size, weight, everything. You are limited. Put that into water. What will happen? The grain of salt has disappeared. But the salt is there everywhere. You have become universal. So that is what you have to become. You have to universalize yourself. Then you are nearer. There is no more limitation and your consciousness can become now open to the divine qualities. Okay? So, is to put our whole conscious being, as far as we are conscious. We have a mind and we have a vital. Even there is a body consciousness also. No? If a mosquito is biting you, you are conscious, although you are concentrating somewhere else. There is a body consciousness. And the body consciousness is very interesting. We don't normally think of the body as conscious. But the body is conscious. Does it not repair itself when it is wounded? It immediately coagulates the blood. There is a purpose. And so purpose is always related to consciousness. So it is conscious that this is harmful to me, it repairs itself. Okay. That also applies to any time when you are ill, the body has got ways to counter it. Okay. If an infection comes in, it immediately produces the bodies in the blood which take care of that infection. So the body also is conscious, but at a very low level. The vital is more conscious, the mind is more conscious. Is there a consciousness beyond the mind and beyond the body-mind life? Yes. So consciousness is something you have to understand very, very clearly. Consciousness is not a product of life, which is what science thinks. They have this idea, biocentrism is what it is called. Mm-hmm. Consciousness comes in when a life form comes. This idea is not right. Okay? Consciousness is something fundamentally real, not depending upon anything. Just like matter is there, whether you are there or not, matter will continue to be there. It's a universal principle. Consciousness also is a universal principle, independent of anything else. That's why it is self-existent. Okay? And that takes various forms. Just like also, matter also takes various forms, consciousness takes various forms, Shakti also takes various forms, even Ananda takes many forms. Infinite forms, finite forms. So what is conscious in us? Yoga can be done only with that part which are conscious. Okay? You are not conscious of other things, but the consciousness comes with development of yoga. So is to put our whole conscious being into relation and contact with the divine and to call him in. Surrender to him and ask him to come in. Okay? 1 second. And to call him in to transform our entire being into his. This is something that Sri Aurobindo keeps on saying. In the integral yoga, man doesn't have enough power to transform himself fully. He has to ask the divine to come and do it for him. Will he do it? Depending on how sincere is your call, he will help you. But it has to be a real call, like an innocent child, a pure child who is asking things from his mother. Okay, it should be that like that, without any ifs and buts. There should be no ifs and buts. All right.
Can you speak about tapasya and how it doesn't work as
about
well? Tapasya.
Tapasya is coming.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll come to that. Tapasya is a very interesting thing. It's necessary. Call him in to transform our entire being into his. Note the word entire being. The Jnana Yoga is not interested in the entire being. The Bhakti Yoga also is not interested in the entire being. They want only the emotional part. The Jnana Yoga wants only the knowledge part. And the Karma Yoga is much better, much larger that way. But still, they don't care for the physical, earthly life they don't care for. But it's the widest of the three. So now, he's saying, thus, in a sense, God himself, the real person in us. Now note that the real person with a P cap, This is Sri Aurobindo. He uses the words he uses is person with a P cap is your soul. Again, the soul also we have to be very specific. The soul and the psychic being and the self are all different. But here, when he sees that, he is meaning the psychic being, the divine presence within you, behind the heart. Okay, that's a person. When he uses, are you the body-mind life? You are not the body-mind life. So if you are the body-mind life, it is something impermanent and it disappears at the end of your life. Your body disappears into matter, your vital disappears into the pranic plane, your mind also dissolves and goes back into the mind plane of consciousness. What remains? Only your real person, that's your psychic being. And the psychic being goes into the psychic world, reviews its life and takes birth again. That's a normal process. So here he's saying, you don't have the power to do it, call the divine to do it. Aspiration and ask him to do it. Surrender to him. Let him work in you. Okay? Real person in us, and the body-mind life Sri Aurobindo refers to as a personality with a lowercase p. So when you come across that, you must be careful. What's he talking about? Is he talking about the real soul, the real person in you, which is the soul, or the outer nature, body, mind, life? Okay? So this is the person. The real person in us becomes the sadhaka of the sadhana, as well as the master of the yoga, by whom the lower personality, which is the lower personality? There you are, personality. Lower personality, body, mind and life. Okay? Not the higher planes of consciousness and not the soul either, personality. Lower personality. Is there a higher personality? Yes, but we'll come to that later on. Is used as a center of a divine transfiguration and the instrument of its own perfection. The lower personality is the instrument of its own perfection. You want to go to the divine level. What instruments are you going to use? You have only a body-mind life. Use them. That's what Sri Aurobindo is saying. However imperfect they are the instruments which you have to use to go up. Okay? You have to use your mind, you have to use your heart, you have to use even your body and your actions. Okay? So, an instrument of its own perfection. In effect, the pressure of the tapas, the force of consciousness in us, dwelling in the idea of the divine nature, upon that which we are in our entirety, produces its own realization. Now, this sentence is a very, very condensed one, and there are many aspects which we have to discuss. First of all is the tapas. Second is the idea with an I cap. What is that? Okay. Then he is talking of the which we are in our entirety. What is our entirety? That we have to see. Then its own realization. So, what is the method of, what is meant by tapas? The word tapas is usually, it's confused often with tapasya, which is, there's a negative idea that tapasya means giving trouble to yourself, standing on one foot and doing this and doing that. All those ideas are not very correct. Okay, so tapas is heat. When you concentrate on something, heat is produced. Okay, so that heat is the one that produces and gives effectivity to whatever you are doing. That's the reason why a bird also sits on its egg. It is incubating it, but it produces heat. You can also produce heat in yourself by concentrating your thoughts, concentrating your emotions. By concentration, heat is produced. And heat always purifies. So this is the method by which it happens. The concentration of sunlight, now we know how to use it. And it produces tremendous force. And you can use that force. Exactly in the same way, you have also to use your faculties which are, the sunlight is diluted. But we have now a method of, with concave mirrors, we focus all the sunlight into one point, it produces heat. And you can utilize that heat for effective action. Okay? Similarly, your thoughts are all dispersed. Okay? But you have to know how to concentrate. Get rid of all the dispersion and put everything all in one point. This can be done in many ways. You can concentrate on the idea, you can concentrate on a dot, you can concentrate on a photograph, but keep the mind fixed on that. In fact, it goes so far as to the tantric practice, what is Tratak. Tratak they practice. A white sheet of paper, one dot. You just concentrate on the dot. Or on a flame. There are so many ways of concentrating. Can't be done in 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. It takes a long time. It's again like taming a wild animal. Your mind will move away. Catch hold of it and bring it back to again what you're doing. Catch hold of it again and bring it back. This is one method. Okay. There's another method which is more diverse, but we won't go into that because he's talking of tapas. Okay, so in effect, the pressure of the tapas. So, how do you get effectivity? By concentration. And concentration gives heat. Sometimes you can even feel the heat in your body. Okay. The force of consciousness is dwelling in the idea of the divine nature. So, idea he has put an I cap. Okay. So, we'll discuss that later on. But what is the idea of the divine nature? You can take any one aspect of the divine nature and concentrate on it. Okay. Sri Aurobindo has advised many people to use his own photograph or mother's photograph. In the beginning it helps. If you are capable of concentrating without any physical support, so much the better. Okay. So you, in your mind, you keep one fixed image or idea also and concentrate the mind, and you can concentrate also your emotions, then it can become effective. It gives results. That's what he's saying. So force of consciousness in us, dwelling in the idea. It must live there. It must not be dispersed. Then you are not dwelling. If you are dwelling in a house, you are limited to the house. So the word dwelling means it must remain there. It must not move away. Okay. So dwelling in the idea of the divine nature, upon that which we are in our entirety. We are really divine in our entirety. And what is your entirety? Just now we discussed it. Your body, mind, life, that's the most outermost aspect of yourself. But there is a subconscious, there is an inconscious, there is an intraconscious, there is a circumconscious, and you are everything that the universe is. At the lowest level, there is matter and inconscious. That also is in you. At the highest level is the divine. That also is there in you, in your psychic being. So everything that is there outside is you. Entirely you must know. That's what Swami is saying. Which we are in our entirety produces its own realization. Okay. So now, in the previous one, he has, in the previous chapter or last 2-3 paras before that, he has given a quotation from the Gita, which says, Yo yas shraddha saeva sa, that which is a faith in a man, that he becomes. Now this is a well-known principle in psychology also, that believe in what you believe, you can become. In fact, nowadays all even, it is applied in such a physical manner that all even sports teams have psychologists who are giving them confidence in themselves. So it is something you can apply the same thing in yoga also. Believe in yourself and without ego. The ego can come in. It's not a question of ego. It's a question of belief. Yes, the divine will help me and I will be able to succeed. You must be positive in your thinking. So in our human nature, all sorts of negative thoughts will come in. Oh, I am making an effort, but will I succeed? I don't know. It's uncertain. All these wrong ideas must not come in. Absolute certainty must be there. Then it produces its own realization. That's what he's saying. Okay? Now, the divine and all-knowing and all-affecting. So, all-knowing and all-affecting descends upon the limited and obscure. Which is the limited and obscure? Our body, mind, life. The outer nature. Progressively illumines and energizes the whole lower nature. Which is the lower nature? Mind, life, body. Lower nature. And substitutes its own action for all the terms of the inferior human light and mortal activity. So, the inferior human light is what we are. With our thoughts and our ignorance and a bit of knowledge, with our imperfect mind. Sometimes there are noble emotions, but there are also very perverse emotions, and our body also is subject to disease and death. So, but you must be able to transform all this. Can it be done immediately in 1 second? No. Can it be done in a short while? No. It gets done progressively. Note the word progressively illumines. So you get experiences. But even the experience which comes in a very short time also, it is so fantastic that your whole life takes a complete U-turn. Okay, that's what happens. Every experience that comes pushes you farther onto the path. So experiences are very useful, but one must not hanker for experience. That Sri Aurobindo says very clearly. No hankering. Because that means you're pulling and there's a desire, and the desire is wrong. Okay? You must open yourself rather than pull. Okay? Open yourself to the divine. So that completes the para. Okay?
Now you see we've spent half an hour on one paragraph. And we have enough time to do the next paragraph.
Okay. Now, I'm going into detail because we have to know how Sri Aurobindo uses words and what is the meaning. Lower nature. What is the lower nature in you? Which is the limited part in you? Which is the conscious part in you? You must know all these things clearly. Sri Aurobindo is extremely clear. There is no vagueness at all. When we read the first time either Life Divine or it seems very vague because we don't have a proper idea of what he's saying. But if you have a clear idea of which word is meaning what, it is very, very concrete. So that's why we go into detail a little bit to understand that. Okay, Narad, we go to the next one.
Let's go.
Now, in psychological fact, this method translates itself into the progressive surrender of the ego with its whole field and all its apparatus to the beyond ego with its vast and incalculable but always inevitable workings. Certainly, this is no shortcut or easy sadhana. It requires a colossal faith, an absolute courage, and above all, an unflinching patience. For it implies 3 stages of which only the last can be wholly blissful or rapid. The attempt of the ego to enter into contact with the divine, the wide, full, and therefore laborious preparation of the whole lower nature by the divine working to receive and become the higher nature and the eventual transformation. In fact, however, the divine strength, often unobserved and behind the veil, substitutes itself for our weakness and supports us through all our failings of faith, courage and patience. It makes the blind to see and the lame to stride over the hills. He's put this in double quotes because he's quoting from somewhere. The intellect becomes aware of a law that beneficently insists and a succor that upholds. The heart speaks of a master of all things and friend of man, or a universal mother who upholds through all stumblings. Therefore, this path is at once the most difficult imaginable, and yet, in comparison with the magnitude of its effort and object, most easy and sure of all. So, before we go, that quotation that he has put makes the blind to see and the lame to stride over the hills. In Sanskrit, you have that Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langhayati girim. So, if you have faith, he can make the dumb person become talkative, not speak. Over talkative. He can become vachalam, he can become talkative. And the lame man can be made to jump over the hills. This is what happened. And we have a very interesting case in the life of Christ, because he made the blind to see, if you remember. And what was Christ's message to him? He said, it's your faith that has cured you.
And he walked on water.
Yeah. So, your faith is what can cure you. And that's very interesting, because faith is the most powerful thing. You go to the ashram nursing home and there's a nice writing by mother in large letters. It is finally faith that cures.
I have an interesting story about Ramakrishna. He has to cross a river. And of course, there's a ferryman who comes back and forth. So as he's standing waiting for the ferry, this yogi comes and walks across the river and is waiting for him on the other side. And so he's very proud of his conquest. And Ramakrishna says to him, how long did it take? And he said, 40 years. And Ramakrishna says, for 10 paisa, I can do that.
The story is usually told to illustrate the fact that yoga is not to produce miracles and impress people. That is exactly what Hatha Yoga does. Hatha Yoga develops powers by which there are Ashtasiddhis, what are called Ashtasiddhis. Anima, Lagima, Garima, Mahima. You can become as heavy as you want. You can become as light as you want. And that's the levitation that occurs. Levitation is a fact. Don't think it is something imagined or something false. It's not a myth. Yogis can levitate. It's very, very possible. Okay, so you become so light that you can. So these things the Hatha Yogi manages because he is trying to do that with his body, but it is not to be used in that sense because the ego is there. So the idea, this is Ramakrishna's story, what he said just now. Say, what you think you have done something fantastic, you walked across the river, but what is the worth of that? I can again 2 paisa to the boatman and he will take me across. That's all the worth of your, what you think is so fantastic a deed you have done. Nothing, it's worth only 2 paisa. So that's what
I have a beautiful story about levitation. My friend Dmitri von Mohrenschildt lived in the ashram till the age of 100. When he first came here, he was totally annoyed with everything he saw. He couldn't stand these different workshops, everything. And my friend Eleanor Montgomery said, at least look at Mother once. And so he agreed. She said, go to the tennis court and she'll be playing tennis there. So he goes to the tennis court and he's looking at Mother, not feeling really anything. And suddenly she turns to him, and he told me this personally. I levitated 3 feet into the air. And he said, at that point, I was given to her forever. So.
Makes the blind to see and the lame to stride over the hills. So, we go through each sentence, okay? In psychological fact, this method translates itself into a progressive surrender of the ego. You can't do this immediately. Slowly, slowly, the ego is a very clawing thing. By the way, we must define what the ego is, because in Western psychology, the ego has got different implications and all that. So, what is meant by the ego? The ego is that which makes you feel separate from everybody. Don't think that ego is arrogance and sense of superiority and lording it over others. Those are the results of ego. But ego is nothing but sense of separation from others. In other words, when I am seeing the many in the physical world and I am not seeing the one, okay, I have an ego. I feel separate from everybody else. And therefore you put full attention on yourself, and the consequences are you give a lot of importance to yourself, and that's what we normally understand by ego. But ego really means nothing but feeling separate from others. When your consciousness goes into the spiritual planes of consciousness above the mind, the ego usually dissolves. It's not there anymore. Why? Because you have become universalized. You are in the cosmic consciousness. So, there is an ego, a substratum of ego is there, but that's another matter altogether. So, then you see the oneness of things. You see that all bodies are not separate. They are just matter. All the vitals are only prana individualized forms. So, that you start seeing the oneness of things. So, that is the ego. The ego, when you have to get rid of your ego, that's why. Okay? So that's what the ego is. So this ego has to surrender. Progressive. It can't be done immediately. It's a progressive method. With its whole field and all its apparatus to the beyond ego. Which is the beyond ego? Is to make things simple, we can say, these are not same those words, but it gives a very clear picture of what. The level 1 where the ego is there and the many are there is the physical world. Okay, you have got your body, you have got your vital, you have got your mind. This is the level 1 where ignorance rules. Ignorance is ruling you. Okay, and when you can escape, your consciousness escapes from the body, mind, life and goes in above. You stand above you feel yourself to be outside the body. Then You are in the spiritual planes of consciousness. There the ego disappears. So beyond the ego, Sri Aurobindo is referring to the spiritual planes of consciousness. The spiritual planes of consciousness are not the last. Huh? You must be careful. That's only level 2. There is a level 3 also, which is what Sri Aurobindo is aiming at. Okay? So in the spiritual planes of consciousness, you are free. You feel yourself to be infinite. There is peace. There is no suffering. That's a Buddhistic solution. Go there and get rid of your suffering. But there are many other problems that come up. Okay? All problems are not solved at the spiritual level. There are so many other things. You see the physical world is unreal, for instance. So that's a problem that you have to solve. So that's another matter. So the beyond ego, with its vast and incalculable but always inevitable workings. So when you go beyond the ego, it is vast. You feel a sense of infinity. Incalculable. You can't even quantify it. But always inevitable workings. When your consciousness goes into spiritual planes of consciousness, it starts working miracles in you. You feel your consciousness to be outside the body, mind, life, and now you are free of your limitations. Who is the we? Your soul, not your body, mind, life. The body, mind, life will continue to act in the physical world like a robot because the soul is not there. The mind has a consciousness, the vital has a consciousness, and the body has a consciousness. It is now acting as a robot. Who is controlling this robot? Universal nature. This is something that one has to understand. We all feel that I am free. Nothing could be more unreal and untrue. You are absolutely bound. Universal nature is making you jump and dance according to its will. Exactly as it is making the tree grow. The tree is not thinking, I am growing. The tree is just growing because nature is making it grow. Exactly in the same way, all your actions, all your thoughts, all your emotions are all controlled by universal nature. So when you go up, you realize that I was thinking that I am doing all these things, but I see now that I am not doing anything at all. I am just witness. I am just consciousness. I am immutable consciousness. The body, mind, life is going on. It's a robot being manipulated by universal nature. So the body, mind, life continues to be in the field of imperfection and it is not under your control. So can you control the body, mind, life from your spiritual plane of consciousness sitting above? You are on the mountain top and you want to control what's going on in the valley. Is it possible? To a certain extent, it is possible, but not fully. So what is the solution? Go even higher up. Go to the supermind. There you will have enough power to control what is going on in the valley below. So that is Srimad Yoga. Go to the third level. The first level, ignorance. Second level, spiritual planes of consciousness. Wonderful. Peace, calm, sense of infinity, release, freedom. But not full power. Neither full. So you go to the third level, all the things that you are missing, you will get there in the third level. That's Sri Aurobindo yoga. So that's why he says, my yoga starts where the others are ending. They go to the spiritual planes of consciousness and they are more than happy. That's enough. Liberation is enough. Don't care for the body, mind, life. It will die naturally. Why to bother about it? It's going to disappear in 100 years or less or more. Okay. But I am free. So that's a choice that the individual soul has. The same they're saying, no, you must transform even the body, mind, life. So we get back to our text. So we were in the middle. I am reading the sentence. It requires a colossal faith. Okay. So when you have gone beyond it, it doesn't come easily. Certainly, Sri Aurobindo is saying, this is no shortcut or easy sadhana. It requires a colossal faith. Not the word colossal, huh? Fantastic, huge, an absolute courage, and above all, an unflinching patience. This is something very important. We are always impatient and we want quick results. But you must be very, very patient. For it implies 3 stages of which only the last can be wholly blissful or rapid. Here he is, let's see whether he is going to say what the 3 stages are. Otherwise, he discusses this in a full paragraph, in a full chapter somewhere else. The attempt of the ego to enter into contact with the divine, the wide, full and therefore laborious preparation of the whole lower nature by the divine working, to receive and become the higher nature, and the eventual transformation. The 3 stages that he is talking about is, first of all, the psychicization of the body-mind life. When the psychic comes forward and rules the nature, there is a sense of beauty, sense of truth, sense of harmony, a sense of a constant ananda. So that changes the imperfections it normally removes. This is the first stage, that's what I'm talking about. Second stage, spiritualization. You go to the level 2 of the spiritual planes of consciousness, there you get the knowledge. Then the third level, you get the power to do whatever you want to do. So these are the 3 stages that he's talking about. So in Life Divine, you have a chapter, the triple transformation. The first transformation is the psychicization. Psychic comes forward and much of the wrong thinking and the wrong emotions are removed. But there may be no knowledge. Okay? So you go, now you ascend. The consciousness to ascend to the higher level where you get the knowledge and the freedom. That's another aspect. That also is not enough. So you have to go to the third level, the supermind, where you have now power and ananda and everything to deal with the lower imperfections. Okay, so those are the 3 stages that he's talking about here. So he is just telling you here that it's a very long journey. The attempt of the ego to enter into contact with the divine, the wide, full, and therefore laborious preparation of the whole lower nature. The lower nature is your body, vital, and mind. Okay? But the divine working, by the divine working, to receive and become the higher nature. Which is the higher nature? The spiritual planes of consciousness. Okay? Your mind becomes full of light, your vital becomes pure, and it can also get power. And your body also starts to become free of disease and free of imperfections. That also can start, but it's never a complete thing. It's only at the supramental level that becomes complete. Eventual transformation. In fact, however, the divine strength, often unobserved and behind the veil, substitutes itself for our weakness and supports us through all our feelings. What are the feelings of? Faith, courage, and patience. So the divine is always helping you, and sometimes is helping you even when you are not conscious. That's what Srimad is saying. And it is there, now here that famous sentence, makes the blind to see and the lame to stride over the hills. Okay, so the intellect becomes aware of a law that beneficently insists and a succor that upholds. So, in the mind, you become aware that there is a law that is operating. It's not something which is haphazard. There is a law that operates. Yoga is not a chaotic thing and this can happen, that can happen. No, there is a law that is operating. There are laws, just as there are laws in the physical world, which physics studies and knows, exactly in the same way, there are laws in the pranic world, there are laws in the mental world, and there are also laws above. Where do the laws disappear? Only at the higher levels of consciousness. There is no law at all, there is total freedom. Freedom and law are opposites. Freedom means no law is binding you down. But if there is a law, there is no freedom. You have to follow the law. So, laws are there at the lower levels of consciousness. As you keep going up, laws become more and more frayed, more and more subtle, and more they dissolve. And at the highest level, total freedom. So, it's an anomaly and a very strange thing. When you think you are free, you are really a slave to nature. And when you become a slave of the divine, you are really free. So, that's the funny part. So
I want to know the relation between free will.
Narad, please repeat the question to me. I can't.
The relation between freedom and free will.
And what? Free will?
Yeah.
Relation between free will and freedom.
Oh. It's the same. Free will is at the individual level. No? You feel that you have a free will. You do feel that, no? That I am free, I can do whatever I want. Actually, even that is, nature is dictating. It's very interesting. There was an article once in the Mountain Path which explained this. Okay, there have been scientific studies, and it's very interesting that before you take action, there is something in the mind that occurs. I want to do this. Okay, so is it your will that is telling you what to do, or is it your body? If it is your body telling you, you're not free. You agree? Your body is telling you, but my body is something external and someone is dictating me from outside. So the scientific experiment was a very interesting one. They put electrodes into the brain and they were watching. Before a thought comes into the mind, there is a small time lag between the two. There is a spark in the brain, which you can see actually on your screen. Okay. So after that spark, within maybe a few milliseconds, the thought comes into the mind. In other words, it's your body which is producing the thought. So your body is dictating terms to you. This is how it works. From the spiritual point of view, if you want to, this is a scientific study. It's a very interesting article which came out. If any of you are interested, I can refer you to the article. I think I'll have to look for it, but it's a very interesting one. So there is no freedom at all in the physical world. Raman Maharshi was asked this question. Okay, are we really free? Is there a free will? There is no free will as you understand it to be. There is no free will. You are a puppet of the universal forces. Universal nature is making you do what it wants to do. The thought enters from outside, it enters your mind. The other forces enter your emotional things, also enter into your vital from outside. And you think that it's your own. But it's not your own at all. It's like the wave and the sea. You are the wave, a part of the sea, right? Now, can this wave claim that I am independent of the sea? Can't. It is the sea that is determining the wave. So that's the truth. There is no free will at all in this level. So when does the free will come? When your consciousness escapes from the prison of body-mind life. It goes up. It feels way outside the body-mind life. That's why in our India we call it mukti, liberation, salvation. You are no more, you are free. There is a sense of freedom. But the body-mind life is still operating under laws. Okay. But you have no power to change that. You realize that you are not the doer. In yoga, it's very clear in our karma yoga and all. You are not the doer. Universal nature is the doer. You are escaping. You are only, when you go to the spiritual planes of consciousness, you are the witness. You are the sakshi. You are just watching your body-mind life. You are not at all affected by what's going on. You are free. So freedom comes at the second level. But still there is no power to do what you want. So freedom is one thing, but power to do what you want is another thing. That comes at the highest level. So free will, no free will at our level. No free will. Is that absolutely true? Just 1 second. Is that absolutely true? No. Because an inkling of freedom comes when you make the effort. Because if I say no free will at all, then you can conclude that then what's the use of yoga? No point. So that's not absolutely true. We speak of gradation. The body is absolutely bound to laws. The vital is more free. Okay, it's subtler. I like to always refer to the three planes as ice, water, water vapor. Okay, it becomes same thing is becoming subtler and subtler and subtler. Water is able to move. The ice is not able to move. So when you go to the vital level, already the first beginnings of freedom are coming. When you go to the mind, slightly more freedom comes. Total freedom, total in this sense, you escape from the body-mind life, there is freedom. But while you are identified with your body-mind life and you think that this is me, no freedom. You are a puppet of nature. Yes, Saritadi.
What I had read is the Life Divine, where Sri Aurobindo says that at the highest, Ishwar Shakti is one. when creation takes place, Purush Prakriti becomes separated.
Yes.
That is why when you go to the second round, Purush is separate and he is just watching Prakriti doing whatever. So body
Absolutely.
and mind isn't.
Absolutely.
And when you want to be really free, you enter into the third
Third
where
level.
you become Ishwar and Shakti is with you.
That's
and
right.
you become the doer as
That's
Ishwar.
right. Exactly. What she's saying is, you have to go to the Purusha Prakriti aspect or the Chit Shakti aspect. Okay, consciousness and force. In Western psychology, they use the word knowledge and will. It's basically the same thing. Consciousness corresponds to knowledge, and will corresponds to force, Shakti. So they have to both act together. But at our level, they are separated. But we have to get them together. When you escape from your body, mind, life and go into the spiritual planes of consciousness, you have become the consciousness. But you are not the will anymore. So to get the will and the consciousness, you have to go to the third level. Therefore, this path is at once the most difficult imaginable, and yet, in comparison with the magnitude of its effort and object, the most easy and sure of all. So if you want to transform yourself fully, your path is the integral path. Sri Aurobindo used to ask people in the 20s and 30s, people used to write to him and say, we want to come to the ashram. So he used to ask them, what do you want? We want peace and calm. Then don't come to Pondicherry. You go to Raman Maharishi's ashram. You will get liberation there. But here, no escaping from the physical world. So, if you, that's what he's saying here. Okay. Therefore, this path is at once the most difficult imaginable, and yet in comparison with the magnitude of its effort and object, the most easy and sure of all.
When we say we don't have any free will, how do we get bound with the karmas?
How do we get bound?
With the karma.
The karma is the lack of freedom. What is karma? The law of causality. Whatever you are doing determines what you will be. So your question is a little...
No, so what I understand is I build my karma because of my free will.
Yes.
Or because of the choices and the decisions I make because of my free will. But
Okay.
if I don't have my free will,
Okay. But is your choice right?
no, it's...
Then you are bound by your choice. And the choice is wrong. You will have to face the consequences. That's the law of karma. And as you keep traveling on the journey, your choice becomes clearer and clearer, and therefore you will be free of the law of karma. That's right. The law of karma is law of causality. Whatever, and this is an important thing, because you must understand, blame nobody for your problems. You yourself are the maker of your own condition. This is a very important thing. You don't need to blame anybody. Normally we do always blame others. Oh, he did this to me and I'm in a bad mood now. Not at all. Your bad mood is the result of your own past.
Maybe only have freedom when you have mukti or when you have Tirunatita.
Do
Mukti or
you get freedom only when you get mukti? Is that the same thing he's saying? Do you get freedom when you
Get mukti. Yeah, that's right. Freedom is mukti. Mukti in Indian, the Indian language, mukti means freedom. You are not a prisoner. Normally, our soul is a prisoner in the body-mind life. And we think that we are the body-mind life. But that's when you escape, you realize that you are not the body-mind life, you are pure consciousness, you are the real person. He has used the word real person. Okay, that's what you are. And what is that real person? A portion of the divine. The divine representation in you is not perfect. It is perfect only in essence. It's like the seed at the tree. The seed is not yet the tree. So your soul is divine in essence with potential to become the divine. But it's like the seed. The seed is not the tree. It has to develop into the... So yoga is the way of watering the plant, taking care of it, and then seeing that it becomes a tree. Exactly in the same way, here also, you have to do the yoga. And then your soul can become divine. But it's not in the beginning, it's not divine. It has plunged into the ignorance and darkness on purpose. That's another subject. But the divine has plunged himself into the opposite of himself and is slowly evolving. Individual evolution as well as universal evolution.
I think there was something we were he added to it like Triguna Theta. He asks that also.
Guna, beyond the three gunas.
He's saying is Triguna equal to Trigunatit of the Gita?
Yes, you are right. Because what are the gunas? Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. And Sattva, Rajas, Tamas is body, mind, life. And Triguna Atita. You have gone beyond the body, mind, life. That's right. Triguna Atita is mukti, freedom. Your consciousness is outside your body, mind, life. You will actually feel that you can have, sometimes even you feel yourself to be outside, okay, above the head, and you may even see your own body, mind, life also outside. Your consciousness is up there. So, which is the consciousness? Sometimes they say in our Indian system, they say that the soul and the consciousness are the same. And some other systems say, no, the soul has got a consciousness. So, that is a contentious matter. So, actually, consciousness and soul is really the same essentially. You can take it in that way.
Thank you, Ranga.
Okay.
Namaste all. Namaste.